Hello everyone, it's me Pratima. So this is the all-new Asus Zenbook 14 2023 powered by AMD's latest Ryzen 7000 series CPUs. This thin and light ultrabook starts at 81,000 rupees or some $1,000. You can also find it with an OLED display, by the way, which will set you back a little bit more. The Asus Zenbook lineup over the years has gotten so big that it's really confusing to figure out which one's which, so let me briefly talk about that. Kicking things off is the regular Zenbook laptops, which usually have power-efficient U or P series chips. You'll also find Zenbook X Ultrabooks that sacrifice portability a bit to make room for better thermal design and can even include high-performance H series CPUs. Then there's the Zenbook S series that goes the exact opposite way, slimmer designs with relatively more premium build quality, and if you fancy 2-in-1 laptops, the Zenbook Flip lineup is where it's at, whereas the most premium Asus Zenbook laptops fall under the Zenbook Pro series. Besides high-performance CPU and GPU, these machines also boast some signature features like a physical dial pad, raised keyboard, and even dual screens. Asus recently launched its first laptop with a foldable display as well, but that's simply out of reach for the vast majority of laptop buyers. Okay, let's now get back to the new Zenbook 14 itself. Here, besides a new flavor of processor, Asus has not done much coming from its predecessor. Maybe that's not a bad thing since 2022 Zenbook 14 was already a pretty great everyday ultrabook is what I thought when I first received this laptop. But I definitely think Asus could have chosen a better CPU this time. Before I explain why, we need to know a little about this gigantic mess called the Ryzen 7000 series. It's not so much the naming scheme for me. I think AMD's new naming style does make some sense, but the way AMD has laid out the CPU options in this lineup is super confusing. Normally, you'd think newer processors mean better performance, and normally you'd be right, but not in this case. You can actually end up with a couple gen older CPUs just rebranded under Ryzen 7000 series if you don't know what you're looking for. So while the highlight of the Ryzen 7000 series is AMD's new Gen 4 CPU and RDNA 3 GPU architecture, Zenbook 14 CPU choices like the Ryzen 5 7530U and the Ryzen 7 7730U are actually based on the older Zen 3 and GCN5 architecture. Which means you're not getting fresh new processors here, and the Ryzen 5 7530U and the Ryzen 7 7730U practically fall under Ryzen 5000 series. As you can see from this chart, the Ryzen 7 7730U is just Ryzen 7 5825U with a new name, and that chip powered last year's Zenbook 14. So needless to say, these two post similar benchmark scores in all tests, be it CPU or GPU based. What does all this mean for the actual user experience then? Well, I definitely did not have much of a problem with the Zenbook 14's performance under normal, casual, everyday usage, but on few occasions, I noticed it slowing down when I was working with a few Chrome tabs alongside light photo editing. I mean, it's got 16 GB of DDR4 RAM after all, so this extent of multitasking should not have been much of an issue. Likewise, apps that heavily rely on the GPU would also take a few seconds to catch up every once in a while. This was quite noticeable when running image scripts or object selection tool on Photoshop. To compare, this new Ryzen 7 7730U also scored lower than Intel's last gen i7 1250U processor in most benchmarks I ran, while this Intel CPU marginally beats AMD in terms of gaming as well. So yeah, I think Asus could have actually made the Zenbook 14 a perfect thin and light ultrabook by going with true new gen Ryzen CPUs instead of these rebranded ones, like the Ryzen 5 7540U and the Ryzen 7 7840U, which are indeed Zen 4 and RDNA 3 based. Now, apart from the extra raw power itself, these processors also support the newer and faster DDR5 memory, PCIe 4 SSDs, and USB 4 standard, making them much more future-proof than these older CPUs. Now, given their higher power ratings, you might argue that the Zen 4 processors might not be a good fit for this slim laptop, but no. Alongside Ryzen 7000 series, the Zenbook 14 2023 is also available with Intel's 13th gen CPUs, and Asus has gone with P series chips that have much more higher power requirements, so we can just put the thermal headroom debate to rest. Anyway, let's now get into its design, and as always, the Zenbook laptops from Asus do not disappoint on this front. This thing, as you can see, is sleek, it's sturdy, it's premium, lightweight, and comfortable to carry around in my backpack without a worry in the world, the whole 9 yards. It's only available in this jade black finish, and I am a big fan of such dark, brooding finish on laptops, especially when it's complemented with a clean look and minimal brandings. But the way this thing catches fingerprint smudges so easily, especially on the lid, is a little frustrating. The Zenbook 14's port selection is also pretty decent for a 14-inch laptop. You will not find the latest USB 4 or Thunderbolt 4 connections here, but I am sure that's not a big miss for an everyday laptop like this one. And what you get here are a couple of USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C ports on the right, both capable of display output, power delivery, and up to 10 Gbps of data transfers. Then there's a full-size HDMI 2.1 port and a micro SD card reader, while the left frame houses a single USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-A port. And even though this Zenbook 14 does not have an OLED display or anything, this is a pretty nice 2.5K screen in and of itself. Plus, you also get an anti-glare coating on the screen, which means it is less prone to all the reflection from the ambient lights. Besides this, the color levels and viewing angles on the Zenbook 14 is decent as well, with 99% sRGB and 78% of DCI-P3 color gamut. It is even workable for light photo editing and such. Plus, with 493 nits of brightness, I also have had no trouble getting my work done on this laptop indoors or even outdoors. I was also hoping that Asus would bump to a 90 or 120Hz refresh rate this time, but this is still a 60Hz display. Not that it matters a lot for an ultrabook, but a higher refresh rate sure would have been nice. Okay, moving on, the keyboard on this year's Zenbook 14 is a familiar one. Asus makes some of my favorite chiclet style keyboards, and the one on this laptop is no exception. I absolutely love how these keys have a soft feedback with a nice travel distance, which makes typing really enjoyable. And since its noise profile is on the down low too, this is essentially an A+ keyboard in my books. The Zenbook 14 also has got the Argo Lift hinge that literally elevates your typing experience. But the most exciting thing for me about this keyboard is its well-put backlighting. It seems that Asus has finally taken a page out of Apple's MacBooks this time in terms of lighting up the keyboard, and I could not be happier. Just like the keyboard, this glass trackpad also feels right at home to me. It's smooth and sufficiently large for all my multi-finger gestures or scrolling actions. It also doubles as a digital numpad, which I'm sure someone who works in accounting will appreciate a lot. Over the years, Asus has really stepped up its speaker game as well. The Zenbook 14 Flip OLED that I recently reviewed had a fantastic set of stereo speakers, and I am happy to see that this guy borrows the same audio setup. They get loud, they sound balanced, and there's not much distortion at the highest volumes either. As for the webcam, Asus has been generous enough to switch to a 1080p camera on this year's Zenbook 14, so naturally the clarity and sharpness side of things are noticeably better here, and I had no issue attending video calls on this thing. The battery life on this thing is pretty sweet too. I am averaging around 7 hours of screen on time with my everyday chores on the Zenbook 14, so that's pretty great. The 65-watt AC adapter that Asus ships is also pretty sleek to complement this laptop's portability, and it takes a little over 2.5 hours for a complete refill. So everybody, that was all for my full review of the all-new Asus Zenbook 14 2023. For the most part, I'd say that this laptop nails that premium ultrabook experience, and for students or business folks who don't need that much horsepower and want a lightweight laptop that runs cool and quiet and has a good battery backup, I could certainly see this one being a viable option. That being said, I can't help but think there are some major missed opportunities here, mostly thanks to that new but old AMD processor. Based on my experience with smartphones, you guys already know that I am not a big fan of product rebranding, and the same thing applies here too. The true Ryzen 7000 chips that I recommended earlier could have worked wonders here without any significant impact on battery life or the cooling system, but unfortunately it is what it is. So I think instead of this, you'll actually get your money's worth with last year's Intel-powered Zenbook 14 instead, since those are currently available at a similar price or even less. The last year model poses as a much better alternative thanks to its more capable processor and also that high refresh rate OLED display. So guys, that is all for this video. If you liked it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and while you're there, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to not miss any future videos. Till then, I am Pratima and thank you so much for watching.